I'm not proud of most of the things I've done, but this one still sits in the back of my mind like a splinter you can't quite pull out. This probably belongs here more than anywhere else. I've lurked on confession threads for years, reading other people's stories and telling myself at least I never did anything that bad. Funny how the mind works when it wants to protect you from yourself. The truth is, I crossed the line a long time ago. And it started with something that didn't feel like a crime at all. Back then I was 28, working a forgettable job in a mid-sized office building doing IT maintenance. Not the cool kind of IT where you're designing systems or building software. More like the guy people call when they forget their password or when the printer decides to develop a personality disorder. Boring work. Invisible work. The upside of being invisible, though, is that people stop noticing you entirely. They talk freely around you. They assume you're harmless. They assume you're not listening. That's how I first noticed her. Her name was Emily. She worked 2 floors above mine in marketing. I didn't know her personally, but when you're the guy who fixes computers, you end up in a lot of offices, standing quietly behind people while they vent about their boss or complain about their lives. Emily was different. Not in some dramatic, movie-style way. She was just normal. Friendly. The kind of person who said thank you and actually meant it. The first time I helped her with something was a routine ticket. Her laptop wouldn't connect to the network. 5-minute fix. She thanked me like I'd saved her week. That should have been the end of it. But a couple weeks later, I noticed something by accident. While I was checking system logs on one of the admin panels, I saw a user profile pop up. Hers. Nothing unusual about that. Except I could see a lot more information than most people realize IT admins can see. Login times. File activity. Device connections. Little digital footprints. At first it was just curiosity. The harmless kind, I told myself. The kind anyone would feel if they suddenly realized they had access to information about someone they'd met. I clicked. Just once. That's the thing about lines you shouldn't cross. You almost never realize you crossed them until you're already standing on the other side. At first, it didn't feel like surveillance. That's the lie I told myself, anyway. When you work in IT, you get used to seeing information that technically isn't yours to look at. System dashboards, login histories, file activity, it's all just data streams scrolling across screens. Most of the time you ignore it because you're busy fixing whatever broke. But that day I didn't ignore it. Emily's account was open in the admin console because I had just reset her network permissions. Her name sat there in a neat little row of user logs. Timestamps. Device IDs. Folder access. Nothing dramatic. Still, I clicked into it. I told myself it was normal. Routine. I was just making sure her connection issue was fully resolved. That was the excuse. The truth? I was curious. It felt strange seeing a person's daily rhythm laid out in numbers. When she logged in each morning. When she took lunch. When she stayed late. It wasn't personal information exactly, but it painted a picture. And once you see the outline of someone's life like that, your brain starts filling in the rest. Here's something most people don't realize about office networks. They're basically built on trust. Trust that the people maintaining them won't abuse their access. Trust that the guy resetting your password isn't also quietly digging through your activity logs. I had more access than I should have for someone in my position. Not because anyone gave it to me intentionally, but because systems grow messy over time. Permissions stack up. Old admin rights never get revoked. And one afternoon, while I was killing time between tickets, I realized just how deep that access went. It started with the file server. Emily's department had a shared workspace for campaigns and reports. Normally I wouldn't care about marketing files, but I noticed something interesting in the logs. She accessed a private folder almost every night before logging off. Curiosity nudged me again. I opened the access map. Turns out, because of a legacy admin group I'd been added to months earlier, I could technically browse that directory. There it was again, that invisible line. And this time, I didn't just step over it by accident. I stood there, thinking about whether I should cross it on purpose. I remember sitting there staring at the screen longer than I should have. The folder was right in front of me. One double click away. That's the dangerous part about access like that. It doesn't feel like breaking in. No lock to pick. No password to crack. Just a normal folder sitting inside a system you already belong to. My brain started doing what brains do when they want something. It's not like you're stealing anything. You're just checking. It's part of the system you manage anyway. I even convinced myself it might be useful. What if her network issue had corrupted something in her files? Maybe I was just verifying everything worked. Looking back now, that excuse sounds pathetic. But in that moment it worked. I opened the folder. Inside were project drafts, presentation slides, marketing plans, normal office stuff. I skimmed through a few documents, half expecting to feel like I'd discovered something important. Instead, it was boring. And yet, somehow that made it worse. Because once I realized how easy it was, I started wondering what else the system would show me. After that first time, I told myself it was a one-off thing. Just curiosity. Everyone snoops a little when they realize they can, right? At least that's what I kept repeating in my head. But the problem with curiosity is that it doesn't shut off neatly. Once you notice something unusual, your brain keeps circling back to it. A few days later I checked the logs again. Not intentionally. At least that's what I told myself. I was already in the admin console fixing a permissions issue for someone else, and her name popped up again in the activity panel. Same pattern. She logged in around 8:40 every morning. Lunch break almost exactly at 12:15. Most people left by 5, but she stayed until 6:30 or sometimes later. And almost every evening, right before logging off, she opened that same private folder. I started paying attention. Not just to the logs, but to her schedule. The way she moved through the building. When she came down to the cafe on the first floor. It wasn't a plan yet. But something inside me had started watching. The strange thing is how quickly something wrong can start to feel normal. At first I only checked the logs occasionally. Maybe once every few days. Just quick glances while I was already inside the admin console doing real work. Then it became once a day. Then every morning. I'd arrive, boot up my workstation, open the ticket system, and almost automatically pull up the activity dashboard. Emily's account would be somewhere in the list, quietly recording the start of her day. It started feeling like watching the opening scene of a show I followed. I noticed little details. Days she arrived late. Days she logged off early. Once she didn't log in at all, and I actually caught myself wondering if she was sick. That was the first moment I realized something about this had shifted. Because I shouldn't have cared. We'd spoken maybe 3 times in total. Yet somehow, through nothing but system logs and timestamps, I knew more about her daily routine than most of her coworkers probably did. And that realization should have stopped me. Instead, it pulled me deeper. The next step happened slowly enough that I didn't notice how far I'd gone until it was already normal. Logs weren't enough anymore. Numbers tell you when someone does something, but not why. And my curiosity had evolved from simple observation into something more intrusive. One evening I was working late, finishing updates on one of the building's network switches. Most of the office had already cleared out. The floors were quiet in that hollow after-hours way, fluorescent lights humming, cleaning staff moving carts down empty hallways. That's when I remembered something. The company had recently installed new internal security cameras. Nothing dramatic, just basic hallway coverage connected to the same network infrastructure I maintained. Which meant, technically, I had access to the system. I opened the camera dashboard. Rows of small video feeds appeared. Reception. Elevator banks. Corridors. And then I noticed the hallway outside the marketing department. For a long moment, I hovered over the camera feed. Because this time I knew exactly what I was doing. I clicked the camera feed. The hallway outside the marketing department appeared in a small window on my screen. Grainy, slightly washed out security footage, the kind you usually only see when someone's reviewing an incident. At first, nothing happened. Just an empty corridor, a row of closed office doors, the soft flicker of fluorescent lights. Then the elevator at the end of the hall opened. Emily stepped out. Seeing her there, live on my screen, sent a weird rush through me. It felt completely different from looking at system logs. This wasn't data anymore. It was a real moment, unfolding in real time. She walked down the hallway, coffee cup in hand, scrolling through her phone. Totally unaware that someone 2 floors below was watching the exact moment her workday began. That was the first time the situation gave me a real jolt of adrenaline. Because suddenly it wasn't just curiosity. It was control. I could see things she didn't know anyone could see. Small parts of her day that weren't meant for me at all. And instead of closing the window, I kept watching. After that night, things escalated faster than I like to admit. The camera system had playback logs going back weeks. At first I told myself I was just learning how the system worked, testing features, checking storage limits, making sure recordings were functioning properly. Another excuse. In reality, I started reviewing footage from times I knew Emily had been in the office. Morning arrivals. Lunch breaks. Even small things, like when she'd pause in the hallway to talk to coworkers. Security cameras don't record sound, but body language says a lot if you watch long enough. And the more I watched, the more patterns appeared. Who she talked to. Which days she brought lunch from home. Which afternoons she left the building for coffee. None of it was dramatic information. Just ordinary life moments. But when you collect enough ordinary moments together, they form something surprisingly detailed. One evening, while looking through archived footage, I caught myself predicting when she would walk down the hallway. And when it happened exactly the way I expected, I felt something I probably shouldn't have. Pride. Up until that point, I could still pretend none of this was intentional. I was just observing. Looking at logs. Checking cameras that I technically had access to anyway. But somewhere along the way, my curiosity turned into something more deliberate. I started thinking ahead. If Emily usually left for coffee around 3:20 on Thursdays, that meant she passed the lobby at roughly 3:23. The camera timestamps confirmed it almost every week. One afternoon I caught myself doing something strange. I wrote the time down. That's when the idea formed. Not a full plan, not yet. Just a thought sitting quietly in the back of my mind. If I already knew where she'd be and when, I could accidentally run into her. A normal conversation. Something harmless. Except it wouldn't really be accidental, would it? Because everything about that moment would be built on information she never agreed to share with me. And even as that realization crept in, I didn't delete the note. The following Thursday, I tested the idea. All afternoon I kept glancing at the clock on my monitor. It felt ridiculous, like I was rehearsing something that shouldn't need rehearsing. Still, when 3:20 rolled around, I shut down the ticket I was working on and headed toward the elevator. My heart was beating faster than it should have been for something so simple. The lobby cameras had shown the pattern clearly. She'd pass the front desk, cut across the seating area, and head out the glass doors toward the cafe across the street. At 3:23, almost exactly on schedule, she appeared. For a second I froze, pretending to check my phone while she walked closer. Then we almost bumped into each other near the exit. "Hey, William, right?" she said, recognizing me from the laptop fix weeks earlier. That caught me off guard. I had engineered the entire moment, but she greeted me like it was the most normal coincidence in the world. And somehow that made the whole thing feel even stranger. The conversation itself was completely ordinary. That's what made it so unsettling in hindsight. We walked out of the building together, the late afternoon air hitting us as the glass doors slid shut behind us. She mentioned she was grabbing coffee and asked if I was heading out too. I said yes. Another lie that came out far too easily. We crossed the street toward the cafe, making small talk about work. She complained about a marketing deadline. I joked about people forgetting their passwords every Monday morning. Normal conversation. Harmless stuff. But the entire time, my brain was running on two tracks. One part of me was responding naturally, laughing at the right moments, nodding along. The other part kept thinking something darker. You knew she'd be here. Every step of that meeting had been predicted days earlier. She thought it was chance. I knew it wasn't. And as we stood in line for coffee, she casually mentioned something about usually coming here on Thursdays. I nodded like I just learned that fact. Inside, my stomach dropped. For a while, everything went smoothly. We got our coffee, sat at one of the small tables near the window, and talked for maybe 15 minutes. Nothing intense, just the kind of casual conversation coworkers have when they happen to run into each other outside the office. I kept reminding myself to stay normal. Don't say anything weird. Don't reveal anything you shouldn't know. Most of the time, I managed it. Until I didn't. At one point she mentioned she'd been staying late a lot recently because of a campaign launch. Without thinking, I said something like, "Yeah, I noticed you usually log off around 6:30. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd messed up. She tilted her head slightly. Wait, how would you know that? My brain scrambled for an explanation. Something casual, something believable. IT stuff, I said quickly. Sometimes we see login times when we're troubleshooting. Technically not a lie. But the look on her face changed a little after that. Not angry. Just curious. Suspicious, maybe. The conversation kept going after that, but something had shifted. Not dramatically. She didn't accuse me of anything. She didn't get up and leave. But there was a pause, the kind where someone mentally files away a detail they don't fully understand yet. She asked a couple more questions about IT systems after that. Casual questions, but they felt different now. Do you guys see a lot of employee activity? Like, what kind of things show up in those logs? I answered carefully, trying to sound relaxed. Most of what I said was technically true. The system records login times, device connections, network errors. Stuff needed to keep the infrastructure running. But the way she listened made my chest tighten. Because suddenly I was hearing how invasive it sounded out loud. For weeks I'd treated those logs and camera feeds like harmless information streams. But sitting across from her, explaining even a fraction of it, I realized how it might feel from the other side. Like someone watching through a window you didn't know existed. For the first time, guilt hit me properly. We finished our coffee not long after that. The conversation drifted back to normal topics: weekend plans, work stress, the usual filler people use when they don't know each other very well. But I could still feel that earlier moment sitting between us. When we left the cafe, she waved and headed back toward the office. I watched her cross the street and disappear into the building. That should have been the moment I stopped. And in a way, it was. Back at my desk later that evening, I opened the admin console out of habit. Emily's name appeared in the activity panel like it had dozens of times before. For a few seconds I stared at it. Then I closed the window. Nothing dramatic happened after that. I wasn't reported. No investigation, no confrontation. As far as I know, she never realized how much I had seen. But the strange part is this. Getting away with it didn't feel like relief. It felt worse. Because once you realize how easy it is to cross a line like that, you also realize how important it is not to.